are you good at technology is really, are you any good at learning? Because if you're not a learner, it won't have any positive effect in your life whatsoever. What artificial intelligence is going to do is going to separate the learners from the non-learners.
You are one of the first people, I think, to really understand and see how big the future was going to be with ChatGPT.
Well, I blame you. First of all, I blame you because I was having conversations with you, and you were kind of unique in my coaching experience in the sense that you were into this technology. We're about 10 stages above the microchip, the subject that you were focusing on, which was artificial intelligence. But I noticed that hardly anybody in the 1970s, 1980s, 1990s, it really wasn't until I would say that the internet, so in the 2000s, that the internet became something that suddenly people began saying, this is really different. They'd gone through the personal computer, they were using personal computers, but they were treating it as a thing, not as a total context of the way that the future is going. So when artificial intelligence came along, specifically with ChatGPT, it seemed to me that this was brand new, but it was in a continuum of something that had happened, decades before that.
Yeah, one of the things that I think is really unique about your perspective as you walk into workshops is a lot of times I find you ask a question about the future. And then the first thing that we do is we point to the past of where we'd done that thing before.
Mm-hmm.
As you think about that as it pertains to AI at Strategic Coach, what are your thoughts around that? What are your thoughts around the past successes that you've had with technology or technological revolutions and how that'll lead to the next success?
Well, I just happen to be writing a book right now, and the book is called Everything is Created Backward. Okay, that's the title of the book. Everything is created backward. And what I've noticed is that there's some thinking, which I think is wrong thinking, where people are saying the past doesn't matter anymore because technology is just going to change everything. And I had the coaching experience. It's a very, very fundamental principle of strategic coach that you can't have a bigger, better future unless you go back and multiply the value of your past. Okay, so you have to go back and say, this isn't entirely new. There's things I've done that are, I've been up against brand new challenges before in my entrepreneurial life. And my sense is that if you go back and get the learning from how you met those previous challenges, this would give you 80% of what you need in terms of adjusting and taking advantage of something new. And that I don't find too many people on the planet that take that approach.
No, and I'll tell you, it was a huge unlock for me when we were working with a team that was unbelievably hesitant to technology. Kind of the classic AI doesn't work for us, we've already tried it crowd. And very emotional about will technology take or not take their jobs. And I mentioned that before you had Dropbox, you just went to the filing cabinet, and how much better did your life could become because of Dropbox? And so it was a nod to you that I did that. And all of a sudden, it was a huge unlock for everybody. So I'm not surprised at all that it works every time because I think pointing to their past successes ends up paving the way for where that future goes.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and there's a fundamental human lesson there that the smartest people build on what other people have already done the work for. There's a favorite scientist that I follow. His name is Joe Henrich, and he's a tenured professor in the United States at 4 universities at the same time. I've never come across this. And he had an unusual set of interests. One of them was aerospace engineering. He got his first degree in aerospace engineering. But what he really became famous for more and more was actually anthropology. How did humans get from the beginning to here? And so I think that fact that he was combining two disciplines, which I'd never seen anybody who combined aerospace engineering and anthropology. It just
Right.
I mean, so I said I said it isn't that he's done this, but what kind of brain is it that he's operating with that he can see a relevance between these two things? And his whole point was that roughly a million years, this is his thesis, roughly a million years ago, he said we have indications from our findings, anthropological findings, the earliest evidence of humans doing something different from any other species. It's about a million years. And he said something happened where they created a second intelligence. All creatures, all species have intelligence. I mean, people talk about, artificial intelligence today, and they say, oh, this is something brand new. We've been living in a massive exponential world of intelligence. Okay, I live the place where I have in Toronto, our main house. We have 7 oak trees, huge oak trees in the yard. And where I have oak trees, you have squirrels. And I watch the squirrels, and the squirrels apparently can bury 1,000 acorns during their, they have a harvesting season when they go after and they can remember where they buried them. And I said, that's superior to any human intelligence. I said, I can't do that. I don't know. I don't know. So when you look at the natural world that we live in, it's just massive intelligence. It's just not human intelligence. It's squirrel intelligence. It's oak tree intelligence. Okay, so his whole point is that it's all intelligence, and humans are the first ones to create a variety of intelligence where they can access the intelligence of other species, they can access the intelligence of other humans. And he says, and then you get this breakthrough. So you talk about the microchip revolution now, and this is 50 years old, the use of the word microchip. And you're talking about artificial intelligence, but it's just all intelligence, and humans are the species that can access virtually the value of almost any other kind of intelligence, and no other species can do that.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. And speaking of intelligence, and kind of, I think where a lot of people take AI, or where they think about AI, is they think that it's going to be so much smarter than everybody else on the planet that that we're not going to be able to compete. And while on a pure intelligence level, maybe that's going to be true, maybe it's not. I don't try to predict the future on those kinds of things. I think one of the things that makes you and I also very similar and unique is our love for gaining intelligence with Wikipedia. I love going to Wikipedia and just clicking around and seeing what I can find, as do you. And I'm curious, you've been tinkering a lot with Perplexity.ai. Have you started to use it that way as well?
Yeah. And, it gave me another book title, and that our listeners may not know, but I write a new book every 90 days. Okay. And I've done that for my goal is 100 books in 100 quarters, and I'm working on book 38 and quarter 38 right now. So one of the things that I do is I ask interesting questions, and my questions tend to be very involved questions. They're very contextual questions. But I came up with a book title that you are as smart as the quality of your questions. Human beings are as smart as the quality of their questions. And this is going to be the great advantage that smart question answers have with AI. That if you can ask a great question, you'll get a great answer. If you ask a mediocre question, you'll get a mediocre answer.
I just saw a tweet yesterday from a guy by the name of Paul Graham, who's sort of a giant in Silicon Valley. He was the inventor of the web application. And what he said was something to the effect of, AI will really show us who the learners are. And I couldn't agree more because I think, great learning comes initially from great questions. And so, yes, the quality of your learnings and are determined by the quality of your questions. The AI is just, it's merely a sounding board for you.
Yeah. So you're talking to someone who's 50 years older than you, but let's have you talking to someone who's 29, like you are. And are you noticing that their being in their 20s is any advantage to accessing AI?
No, and I actually think, outside of people that really love tinkering with technology, I actually think that it's a disadvantage. I'm starting to see it become more disadvantageous because I think that the shift that we're seeing right now with AI is so big. Like, I try not to be somebody that sells change. And I think a lot of Silicon Valley can do that. But I do think that this shift is really, really profound. And people that are 10, 20, 30, 40, 50 years older than I am, I think seem to really remember that in large part because they remember the shift to the internet and the shift to the microcomputer, depending on your age. And people that are my age or a little bit younger have always been so tech native with smartphones and laptops and tablets and those sorts of things, that I think they're being caught a little bit on the back foot here. Although I will say I have hope. I was at a coffee shop this morning with a couple of people who are in Edinburgh with me to look at universities. So they're seniors in high school. And their question for me this morning over coffee was, how do I pick a career path that won't be disrupted by AI? And they asked it. I didn't even mention that I do software.
That's a really good question.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
My response was pick a career path where you're building great relationships with people, whether it's clients or it's team members, and where you and them can build a bigger future. Because AI is great at stuff from the past and it's great at stuff that's repetitive, but AI doesn't build futures for people.
Mhm.
What do you think about that?
Yeah, no, I'm completely. First of all, I think I have an advantage because I've been, the experiences I taught you about that I hated school, and and the reason was it seemed to me to be very conformist, and it seemed to be very, very static. Okay, and we have a client that you know well, Peter Stephen Poulter. And Stephen has three really remarkable sons. And they're remarkable in that none of them resemble each other. They have a completely different take on life, which I think reflects enormously well on their parents. That they didn't get favored by what they were interested in. They were favored in that they should be interested in a lot of things. Okay. And one of them, when he was 10 years old, he came home after school and he says, Dad, I've figured it out. And his name's Sam. And Stephen said, What have you figured out? He says, I understand what life is all about. I understand how life works. And he says, Really? Yeah. He says, I've discovered that if the teacher says something today and I come home and I go on YouTube and I find 5 videos on the subject that he or she talked about, tomorrow I know more than they do.
There's a lot of painful, I think, truth in that, especially for a lot of parents.
And for a lot of teachers.
Yeah.
So I liken it to the crossover that happened with Gutenberg. If you go back to the year that is generally picked when the movable type printing press, because there were printing presses before that. But the thing that Gutenberg figured out was because before Gutenberg, you had a page, it had to be carved. It had to be carved. You had to carve the whole page. And Gutenberg, who was actually a goldsmith, said, if I just make a whole lot of molds that are the letters of the alphabet, then I can make a lot of these little letters, and then I can just create a framework where I can just use the 26 letters of the alphabet and I can just rearrange it. And it sped things up easily by 10 to 20 times, just having that. And he was doing it with gold before, and now he was doing it with lead, which probably gave him some later life problems. You know? And
Yeah.
but there's a great story, maybe an apocryphal story. Apocryphal is that if it didn't happen, it's still a good story. But a lot of the early jobs that Gutenberg got was actually printing sermons of religious authorities. Okay. And there's one, a monk or an abbot at a local monastery was very famous for his sermons, which were, of course, all handwritten. And he had a big job, and Gutenberg reproduced about 20 of his sermons in a book, printed, published, and it was 100 books. And they gave the abbot, who was a big guy, he was very important politically, he was very important in the church, and he gave him a special deal and had the 100 books sent to the residents. And then he didn't hear anything back. He didn't hear anything back from the abbot himself. And then he started inquiring discreetly. He says, well, has he even read it? And they said, well, he hasn't hasn't proofread all 100 yet. So he hadn't grasped yet what the context of the breakthrough was. He was still going that if you had 100 books, you had to read all 100 books to see if there were any mistakes. Well, there might be a mistake, but it would be the same for all 100 books.
Yeah.
And you take that example and you move it into 6 centuries later, and most people haven't grasped what the usefulness of this actually is. I had one perplexity question, and it had 23 different sources. Okay. And it shows you 4 or 5, and then it says 16, 17 others. And you can go and you can do all that reading, but it's just read all 23 for you. And it's picked up just the information and just the knowledge that relates directly to the context of your question.
Yeah.
And I said, that's just hard for a lot of people who are used to going to this source and that source and reading that source and then making notes. Perplexity just did all of that for you.
In seconds.
Yeah. Sometimes it's not more than 5 seconds.
Yeah.
And, but the one that really pleased me with Perplexity, and it was about 4 weeks ago that you put me onto this. And I said, Perplexity, why would anyone else need another search engine besides Perplexity? And it gave me 15 reasons why there would be other search engines that you might want other than Perplexity. And I said, this is an honest soul that I'm dealing with here.
Yes. Their index is on truth.
I'm dealing with a really, really honest spirit and technology here.
Yeah, some unlearning might be necessary for the first honest technologies out there.
Yeah, yeah, and we have the famous question in Coach, the R factor question, and I didn't do this, but one of my team members did it for me. And I asked Perplexity, if we were having this discussion 3 years from now, and you were looking back, Perplexity, you were looking back to now, what has to happen in terms of your progress over the next 3 years for you to be happy with the result? And it came down with 5 things that would make it happy: that the quality of our interface is much better than it is right now. Secondly, that we have 10 million subscribers right now, and we'd like to have 50 million. We'd like to have 50 million, and our search has gotten better. It's 5, very, very cogent, very, very makes sense. And then I asked a secondary question: is what are the 10 biggest obstacles that would stop you from being where you want to be three years from now, and it listed 10 obstacles that they're working on. Okay, and because my goal is that all the progress is in how you deal with the obstacles, the money. But at the end, it had a neat little line and said, if we transform all these 10 obstacles into progress, we're feeling very satisfied. I've had worse conversations with humans.
Right. So I have one more question for you as we wrap up. Something that I just stumbled upon last week was that in the early 1900s, the New York Times published an article. And it basically, in this article, in this editorial, said that the author thought that flying machines were 10 million years of innovation away. Meanwhile, the Wright brothers took flight 69 days later. What do you think, or I guess what would you say if entrepreneurs came into your workshop, or if entrepreneurs passed you on the street? What would you say to those folks that said that AI has been promised before, this kind of technology has been promised before, it's not coming anytime soon? I think one of the things that's interesting for me to watch is how quickly you've embraced it and how quickly now all of a sudden it lights up your face. It becomes a tool in your workflow. What do you say to those people that are much slower on the uptick, or might lean a little bit more towards those 10 million years?
I'm trying to picture, would I ever even be meeting human beings like that?
That's true.
I'm trying to think of the situation where, to a certain extent, I think that your use of technology reflects your relationship with yourself. Okay. And what I mean is I really like myself. I mean, I really like, and I only have direct access to one human, so you better be good. You better be good with that relationship, But I value my past enormously, and I would say it's from coaching entrepreneurs for 50 years. I would say it's the biggest obstacle to entrepreneurial growth that they do not value their past experiences. Okay. And if you don't value your past experiences, you're not going to have good questions about the future. And therefore, the technology isn't going to do you any good. It's to the degree that you value who you are uniquely and who and what is there an expanding sense of appreciation for what your past experiences is. That's your ticket that allows you to access what this technology is going to do for you.
That is fantastic. If you were somebody who treated the technology in the past as a competitor or as an unwelcome hassle in your life for learning, for example, where you didn't ask questions about, how could this help me? Then of course it's not going to move the needle for you in the future too. But if you're somebody who's looking back and saying, well, I wonder why this happened, or I wonder what insights I can gain out of these experiences. One of my favorite kind of messages from you was about how if you're still feeling super negative about an experience, it's because you haven't gotten the learning out of it yet.
Mm-hmm.
But if you're somebody who's looking backwards into that past and wondering, well, I wonder how the technology has helped me before, like what's new now, then I think you can really ask a great question around what's new in the future.
Yeah, I think technology is a great magnifier. It's an amplifier, it's a multiplier. If you don't like yourself, your use of technology will multiply your dislike of yourself.
Yeah, yes. I think it certainly will.
And it's interesting because I've been very, very interested in the sharp increase of diagnosable mental illness since social media came on the scene. I mean, especially among adolescents, the teen years, basically the teen years, and it's off the charts now. I mean, the amount of diagnosable mental illness that was never true before, and it is now. And I think that the reason is that if you mentioned this before, and I'll go into that, talking to adolescents about technology is like talking to fish about water.
Yes.
Yeah. What about technology? Technology. Well, I don't even know what you're talking about. Technology. If you've only ever lived in a technological world, you don't have any outside reference points
Mm-hmm.
to say, how does this stack up with how this was done before? But I think that if you're a learner, and it goes back, and I think the essential thing that I got out of this, Evan, in my chat with you this morning, was the whole question about are you good at technology is really a function, are you any good at learning?
That is a great insight.
Because if you're not a learner, it won't be any positive, it won't have any positive effect in your life whatsoever.
Absolutely.
And it goes back to your reference point to the person in Silicon Valley. What artificial intelligence is going to do is going to separate the learners from the non-learners.
Yeah. Yeah. And, an idea is really interesting to me if it holds what I think will be 200 years in the future and 2000 years in the past.
Mm-hmm.
And I would imagine that at some point, 2000 or 4000 or 10,000 years ago, somebody said, I really wonder what happens if. And then
Mm-hmm.
all of a sudden you got something like the ladder or the light bulb or the printing press. And so I think it's the same thing in this case. I wonder what happens if, and then you do something where you tinker with a piece of technology, you tinker with an
Mm-hmm.
AI, and all of a sudden, you've learned something new, or you've come at it from that learner's mindset. And
Mm-hmm.
here it is, your future getting bigger.
Yeah. One little trick, this is a little payment to you, Evan, for introducing me to this one particular AI tool. And that is, I found there's a particular type of question that gets an enormously satisfying answer to. And you say, what are the 10 things or the 10 reasons? But you use the term 10 reasons. And so, for example, I've been following the news that it seems that electric vehicles have really hit a wall this year over the last 6 months. The companies are going bankrupt. The lots are filled with unsold EVs. And so I asked Perplexity the question, what are the 10 biggest obstacles that are preventing EVs becoming a widespread technology in society? Okay. And whoa, I mean, it was like 10 seconds it came back. And there are 10 very cogent reasons, but one of them, for example, is that it takes 500,000 pounds of raw material to create a 1,000-pound battery. And those materials come from 17 different countries. And they use an enormous amount of fossil fuels to extract them. And and they're very toxic. So everything that would work against the global transportation system that would prevent you from getting those materials, the fact that slave labor is being used to extract the materials, and that's a political issue, that's a moral issue, and all the obstacles come from 1 million years of human experience. That this isn't really a good thing that you're doing here. The other one would be that the resale value is about 20% of what a gasoline car is.
Yeah.
And it's just laid it out for me.
Yeah.
Is perplexity against is perplexity against EVs? No, perplexity is against non-learners.
Yeah. Yeah. It's against not asking questions.
It's against not asking questions, which I think there's a very humane aspect of that. So it's so funny. Can I ask a question before we leave?
Yeah.
How did you discover perplexity, and why did you immediately respond so strongly to it?
I don't know how I originally found it, but I follow a lot of people that are in the thick of it in AI and in technology on Twitter, X. And I usually consider my X feed to be a leading indicator of what's about to happen. And so usually, there's lots of noise, but every once in a while it looks like, oh, mate, that might be a signal. And I'm sure at some point, perplexity just crossed my path. And so I decided to take a look at it and see what was going on. But this was back 6 months ago now. And then it took me a little bit to use it all the time. There was like a muscle memory, I think, problem. But I think it always felt to me, the reason why I had such an emotional reaction with it was because it always felt to me like it was sitting on the same side of the table.
Yeah.
The thing that irritated me the most with ChatGPT was when it wouldn't give me an answer. I'm sorry, I can't give you an answer because. And it's like, well, wait a second. Now we're adversaries in this process. And there are things that ChatGPT does very well, but it felt adversarial when I would get that kind of like stumbling block. Whereas with Perplexity, it was immediately something that made me feel like, oh, wait a second. I just hired an administrative assistant who searches the web and gets me answers really fast.
Yeah. 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 It's almost like it's coming back with a judgment. You shouldn't be asking this type of question.
Right. Yeah. It kind of felt a little bit like a ministry of truth for a little bit.
Yeah.
And they're working it out and all that stuff. But it felt like a ministry of truth. That's the truth, but we're not allowed to go there. Or, look at this other truth over here instead. Whereas Perplexity just said, hey, this is the answer.
Yeah. Yeah. Ask another question like this and we're notifying the FBI.
Yeah, you know what? What's so funny about Perplexity is it's like, here's the answer, whether you like it or not. This is what I found on the internet. And then it's like, just in case you're curious, here are 3 more questions about the exact same topic that yet you wouldn't be able to talk about on other AI platforms. So thank you very much for listening. If you'd like to check out more of Dan Sullivan, more of Strategic Coach, head to strategiccoach.com. If you'd like to hear more about Teammate AI, we're on a mission to automate 10 million hours by 2030. You can learn more about us at teammateai.com. Other than that, thanks for listening. Have a great day.
I get to be a kickoff guest. That's great.
You do. I was getting ready for this morning, and I was thinking, if anybody is going to be the first guest, I think Dan is the absolute perfect person to have. I am grateful that you've been such a great coach, such a great mentor and friend over the last several years. I'm looking forward to the next 50. But yes, thank you very much for being here. Thank you for joining me.
Great.